Welcome to Talk Flicks with Boss Chicks. I'm your host, Crystal, and today we will be continuing our conversation about race relations in America. Today we have two very distinguished guests with us today. So let's go ahead and introduce them. So with us today, we have Jeremy Du Bois. He is a human resources manager. He is a graduate from Bowling Green State University. He also has his master's in public administration. Thank you for joining us today, Jeremy. Next, we have David Atwood. He is on the board of the Houston Peace and Justice Center. He is also a member of the Center for the Healing of Racism in Houston. And he works on criminal justice issues all across the board. So thank you for being with us today, David. We appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get into, I've been asking this question quite a bit when we are having this discussion. And so the thing I always kind of start this discussion off with is just to kind of see, how do people feel about race relations in America right now? So I'll start with you, Dave. Are you optimistic about race relations? How do you feel about race relations in our country today?
Well, let's just put it this way. I feel a little bit better about it right now than I did, a couple of months ago. But it seems to me like it's so ingrained that we've got a lot of work to do still. I don't think a lot of people, especially white people, fully understood how ingrained it was in our whole country. But I certainly have become aware of it. So I feel a little bit optimistic, but I'm not really. There's so much work to do. And after all the protests with following George Floyd's death, my comment was, those protests are really woken people up, and a lot of people. But at the same time, if they don't continue, if things sort of fade in the background again, as the people who want to maintain the status quo, and there's a lot of them, if we don't keep it up, if we don't keep the pressure on, if we don't keep working on this, we won't move forward that far, because these things are really ingrained. I don't like to even believe that it's true, but I know it's true, all the way up into the highest levels of government.
I think that we also have a long way to go. I've watched everything transpire these past few weeks, and it really just shines a light on how much negative energy is really out there. I think the biggest thing is there just seems to be a lack of understanding amongst each other. Someone would disregard my experiences because they haven't had those same experiences, but we're really living in two different Americas, two different societies. And the only way to get past that is to actively engage in dialogue with one another so that we can reach a better understanding. We're not there yet. That's why it's so vital that we're having these conversations, because it does begin with these type of conversations so that we can progress forward.
You guys mentioned just how, the spotlight has been shown on this issue. Is it that people didn't know this was happening, or they just were like, I don't know, just kind of willfully ignorant?
It's one of America's biggest sins and greatest sins. It's been here since the beginning. It hasn't gone anywhere. I think people tried to sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't exist because it's uncomfortable to have that conversation. It's uncomfortable to look in the mirror and say, I'm racist, or I'm prejudiced, or this country has a race issue. It's an uncomfortable conversation. But if we're ever going to get to where we really need to be, which is a society that's full of equality, not just for one race, but for all, then we have to have these uncomfortable conversations. There's no other way to advance.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I think there's, being a white person, I know there are a lot of white people that are not, as that word goes, they're not woke up yet. They don't know what's going on. I've been to programs on, white privilege. A new phrase I've heard recently is white fragility. And that white fragility is when somebody tells the truth, really tells the truth about what's going on and about white privilege and about systemic racism, some white people will get defensive, and it's like they're fragile. They can't have the conversation like, oh my goodness, this is good. And that's another thing that we're dealing with. Every person that's had privilege is dealing with, they don't really, they like to hold on to that privilege. They really do like to hold on to that privilege. And that's going to be a big obstacle for a lot of people. I came from the East Coast back in 1972 to Houston. It was probably the best thing that ever happened to me as an individual, because I came from a town that had one black person in it. I don't know if there are any Latinos around. And then I came to Houston with its tremendous diversity and got to meet different people of all different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities. And so I'm not there yet. I'm not going to even say that I am. I mean, I'm sure I've got a lot of things I've got to do still, but I certainly have got somewhat woken up. But white people, a challenge for white people is giving up their privilege. That's all there is to it. And they first got to become aware of their privilege. And a lot of white people don't know that. There's some people that I think that have white privilege who are willing to change when they realize and learn it. There are other people that want to hold on to it because it's power and it's a financial advantage, and they're going to want to hold on to it. And we see a lot of those people in politics.
I've, had conversations with white people who, honestly, they didn't really know what white privilege was. And so how would you specifically define white privilege, like in easy, simple layman terms?
It's really having things real easy in your life, quite frankly. It's being able to get an education without a super big struggle or coming out with a bill like $50,000 or $100,000 at the other end. It's being able to get a job relatively easily, not having any barriers there. It's being able to get finances relatively easy, like for buying a house or whatever. And it's as simple, quite frankly, as being able to go into a department store and look around and being welcomed, not looked at as suspicious. In fact, you're welcome because they think you got money, you're going to buy something. And so you get welcome. There's probably a myriad of things, probably 100 different things where white privilege takes place.
I mean, what about you? What would be your definition of white privilege?
It's in line with what's been said. It's that realization that are going to happen for you favorably just because of the color of your skin. That is white privilege. Unfortunately, we are living in a time where there are quite a few individuals who actually believe that doesn't exist, that never happens, but it does. They're just too blind to see it. and it needs to be addressed and acknowledged. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah, I think also it is also, I think that it is also being able to live in almost like a bubble of your own culture without ever having to step outside of it in order to function in society. So like a Black person can live in a Black neighborhood, you know, have all Black friends, but they can't live their whole life where it's like, I'm gonna just be in my Black community, my Black culture, and actually function in society. Versus a white person can very much so, you know, live in their white community, be in their, you know, white culture, and never really come outside of that and still function completely fine in society. So I think that is also a part of white privilege that I think a lot of people don't realize as well, is that, like, you know, all the resources and things that you need, you can really stay within your own community, even though that's not really the best way, but you can actually do that and still be functional.
One of the ways I got opened up a little bit woken, was my involvement in the criminal justice system, which opened my eyes. You talk about systemic racism, you really find it there. But we would have meetings, and I would have some people that would tell me, well, Dave, we want to have our meetings over here on this side of town because we feel more comfortable there, or we'll feel safer there. And you know, I'd say to, well, the thing is that you that's that bubble you're talking about, Crystal. And I said, the best thing for you would be to go to the other side of town and go to meetings over there and meet people over there, and go over there at night. Don't just go in the daytime. Go at the time when you think you might have a problem. I says, you'll find some of the most beautiful, wonderful people in the world. And quite frankly, if your car breaks down over there and you're worried about that, you're probably going to have people come out and help you with your car like you wouldn't believe. But the best thing that any white person can do would be to go to the other parts of town and meet the people over there and become friends with them,
Yes.
socialize with them.
Absolutely. I really think that should be almost like a requirement to being an American citizen, just because we try to, you know, be the self-proclaimed melting pot, but a lot of times we're still pretty segregated. So I think, like, it really just needs to be mandated for you to, you know, spend quality time with people outside of your culture, outside of, you know, your four walls of what you're used to. And I really think that would help. What do you guys think breeds racism, particularly in the United States? What do we think are some of the things that are like a catalyst to breeding that kind of racist culture that we often see? Ready?
I think that when you look at the history of this country, it really stems from this idea that someone or a group of people are superior to another group of people. In today's day and age, and even then, it's taught behavior. And so the only way to really eliminate racism for good is to undo that teaching. Well, how do you begin or even begin to change someone's beliefs? Well, you have to know where beliefs come from. Our beliefs come from our experiences. Okay, so if I'm trying to do something difficult like change someone's belief, I would have to alter their experiences. And that goes back to the point that you all just made, where, you know, we go to that other part of town and meet the people that live over there and learn about their experiences. Don't discredit them or disregard them and say, okay, those are your experiences, these are mine. I don't want to live like you, I don't have to, but I can learn something from you, because that's how we grow.
I just think it's mostly learned. I mean, I don't just think anybody's born that way. I think it's the culture they've grown up in, maybe their own family. And thank God that we have schools now that are, it's not where we're supposed to be. I mean, it's got a lot of improvement there too, but they get to meet other young kids who are of different races, different ethnicities, and they just know in their heart that these are good people. This whole thing with George Floyd and all the protests, my two grandchildren who live in California, led were some of the leaders of a Black Lives Movement march, over 1,000 kids in the Los Angeles area. And they did that on their own, entirely. You know, they didn't need any prompting from me, certainly. They didn't probably need any prompting from their parents. I think they did it because they had friends at school they'd met, and they just knew it was the right thing to do.
What are steps that you all can take personally to kind of help improve race relations, just, you know, in your own community? Jeremy, I'll start with you.
I think one of the things I can do in my own community is what I've done. There have been a number of marches here in Cincinnati as of late, and I've had the joy of being a part of those, and really listening to other people's stories has helped me to better understand really the climate that we're in right now. And I have no issue sharing mine also. I think what needs to happen is we have to continue to share our stories and our experiences and speak up for what it is we hope to accomplish. Let's all unite, get on the same page, and let's break it down so everyone will understand what it is we're really trying to accomplish. Okay, we're talking about justice. We want justice. Okay, well, what does that look like? Is that police reform? Is that, some sort of neighborhood watch program? What does that look like? We all need to come together, get on the same page, come up with what it is we're really trying to accomplish, and let's make it happen.
What I've done recently, and I don't know how it's going to work out. I mean, I've been involved with the Houston Peace and Justice Center. We try to, boy, let me tell you, it's difficult because the HPJC has traditionally been a white organization, and we've tried to diversify on the board. It's been difficult to do, and I think it's because, well, I don't know. It could be a whole different discussion. But we've always tried to honor people and organizations that are on the front lines of improving race relations. I recently called up Cherry Steinwender, who's the head of the Center for the Healing of Racism, and I said to Cherry, Cherry, why aren't I on your board of directors? And I just said to her like that, I said, I've been going to your programs for years. And she said, well, we always thought you were too busy to join our board. And I said, well, I'm not that busy. I said, I think I ought to join your board and do what I can do from that level too. I just need to, a white person needs to look at their white privilege and step out and, take some bold steps. And we need to speak out more.
I completely agree with that. I think that's the best use of white privilege, is to actually use it to bring about equality. So it's like you're using it to bring the destruction of it, so to speak, what I mean? So, and I tell people that all the time, they're like, and I've told people several times, I'm like, look, if you're not using your voice, your platform to promote change, bring about awareness, like, just get out the way. Like, you really, don't have anything to really say to me, because I feel like this is not even just, a race issue. It's a human rights issue. Like, this is, like, I was explaining this to, one of my white privileged friends, and I'm like, the cop issue should make you upset, this whole thing, what's happening with these unarmed people getting brutalized and murdered, because guess who has to pay for that lawsuit when the family sues? Like, that's taxpayer dollars. That's your dollars going to pay for a really crappy police officer who's doing a shameful job. Like, you should be upset about that. You know what I mean? And so it really kind of transcends even the racial thing. And that's why I feel like I don't even understand when people are not on board with reform, because it's like, hello, this is costing everybody, whether it's costing your life or it's costing your pocketbook. Like, it's costing, the race relations and stuff in the country. Like, everyone needs to be on board with this because it's literally just out of control. And honestly, you know, we've had marches, we've had protests, and I'm happy about it, but it is still a possibility that these officers will get, you know, off the hook from this. So, you know, we really need to be putting together legislation to really kind of get a hold of this issue for sure. So, yeah. Moving to our next question, and we've talked about this. You guys have mentioned about, you know, when we've had conversations before about systematic racism or systemic racism. How, if you guys don't mind sharing, how has systematic racism affected your life or the people around you?
Want to go ahead, Jeremy?
You first.
First.
He's giving you the white privilege. Here you are.
Yeah. The systematic, a lot of the systematic racism that I'm familiar with is in the criminal justice system. And I've worked on the death penalty issue. I've worked on mass incarceration. Let's just talk about mass incarceration for a minute. I think we've got 2.3 million people locked up in this country, way disproportionately against African Americans, maybe secondly Latinos, third white people. What that does, it destroys, well, first of all, getting back to what you said, Crystal, it costs an awful lot of money to have that many people incarcerated. And that money could be much better used for programs of social uplift, education. This is a big issue right now. The money, I'll tell you about a case in a few minutes, but the mass incarceration, it destroys families, not only destroys the life of the person who's in there, perhaps for a relatively minor crime, but it destroys the family, his family, or certainly has the potential for destroying the family. And it can destroy the community from where he comes, because he would be potentially a person working, supporting the family, supporting the community, but he's locked up, he can't do a gall darn thing. This affects us too, either directly or indirectly.
I've seen systemic racism firsthand. I've been fortunate enough to work for a number of companies, and I've seen it firsthand as it relates to a hiring and promotional point of view. I've watched as countless individuals have been denied those things for a number of reasons. It could be their race. It could be their name sounding too ethnic. It could be a plethora of reasons, and we have companies that, you know, look into that and say, okay, we need to diversify our people, but then at the same time, when you get all the way to the top, there is no diversity there. So I think there's something to be said about that. As it relates to mass incarceration, I agree. We have a serious issue there. And, you know, what is the solution? If we go back just a few weeks during the initial quarantine phase, Cook County had released several hundred inmates due to the spread of coronavirus. So my thought is, okay, if you can release them from prison right out in public, the question then becomes, did they really need to be there in the first place? If you can release them so easily, that doesn't make sense to me. So yes, we have a lot of people in jail, unrightfully so, that should not be. Let's turn them into productive citizens of this society so that we can get back on track. And let's find a way to reduce the amount of people in prison. It's nothing more than a new version of slavery.
It's a business, you know, like mass incarceration is not about rehabilitating anybody. It's not about correcting behavior. It's literally about making money. And that is why, like, the jail culture, I think, is just so completely messed up as well, is because it's not about what it's supposed to be about, you know, and then these people get out and then it's hard for them to probably even, you know, you can't even hardly get a job because, you know, if you got some on your record, people are already like, oh, you can't get this job. So just really just kind of creates almost like perpetual slaves. You know, they end up back in prison a lot of time because the system is set up for them to fail instead of to be actually rehabilitated.
white people, including myself, are pretty dumb on a lot of this stuff. For instance, I knew about slavery. I knew about the civil rights movement. I knew about Jim Crow, somewhat about Jim Crow and about civil rights movement. I knew quite a bit about civil rights movement. I didn't live in the South, so I didn't see a lot of overt Jim Crow stuff. But you know what? In my education, my very limited education in the schools, which is still a problem, I didn't know anything about the convict leasing system or education programs in schools. And you know, even calling the slaves that came here immigrants, or they've used different words. They don't even call them slaves sometimes. They try to redo the programs in the schools. But I see every now and then a real effort to try to improve education on what's happened to people. African Americans, Latinos. You take Texas, for example. What happened in Texas to the Mexican people along the border in particular? And how many lynchings took place there in addition to the other lynchings?
Yeah.
You know, it's our schools need to, all these educational programs need to be looked at, and we need to, you know, I shouldn't at age 50 or 60 be learning about the convict leasing system that kept people in their place, made them slaves, even though slavery was supposed to be done with. So we need to do a lot in that area too, in the educational programs in schools.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of education, I had just recently learned, you guys know, like that song that the ice cream truck usually plays when it comes down your street or comes down the street. That song was actually called "Nigger Want Some Watermelon," ha 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 ha. And it was funny that was called that, because I was like, I used to ask people this all the time when I was like living back in Ohio. I'd be like, why does the ice cream truck only come to like the, you know, the black neighborhoods? And I would just be like, what is that? I've never seen this when I'm in, you know, a different community. And so then when I learned that, I was just like, wow, that's so ridiculous. And it just really kind of shows you just how systemic, like how deeply rooted racism is. Like, there's literally no reason why that's the only song the ice cream truck plays. You know, like, it just is absolutely ridiculous, but it really just kind of shows you how deeply rooted this is, and, you know, why it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time to really kind of eradicate that type of stuff, because it's really, really deeply rooted. We kind of talked about this, but I'll ask you, Jeremy, because we had talked about some encounters that you've had with law enforcement. So how big of a role does law enforcement play in race relations, or just the racial tensions that we see?
A very large role. What needs to happen is, it goes back to a point I made earlier where, you know, they see us one way, we see them another way. If you were to ask any random group of African Americans what their perception is of the police, I guarantee you it's going to be unfavorable. Why is the question now? It's because of their experiences, okay? So if we want to alter their belief about the police, we have to change the experiences. Well, that comes at the hands of not only us, but also the police officers. They need to also work to improve their perception and our realities in the communities that they serve. So what does that look like? Well, I've been pulled over. I'm 36 years old. I've been pulled over more than 30 times in my life, 2 of which were justified for speeding. But what about those other many times? What was it for? And that's what needs to change, because it seems like every time there's a situation, it involves someone getting pulled over or the police get involved in some way, shape, or form. And the next thing you know, we're either in handcuffs or worse, we're dead. So yes, there does need to be police reform. Yes, there needs to be more people of color on police forces throughout the country. And what really needs to happen, specifically, if we're talking about this George Floyd case, is these officers involved really need to have the book thrown at them. So everything that they've been charged with, give them the maximum amount of time for those charges. Throw the book at them. And then warn any other police officers going forward, this is what's going to happen to you if you go down this path. I think that's one step towards justice.
And I'm talking, my experience is primarily in Houston with the police union here, and I think it's all over, basically. They can't have as much power as they have. That has to be somehow modified. And accountability is the number one thing in my mind. When everything that was going on with George Floyd, all the protests, and we had them in Houston, they're all, as you know, all over. We had 8 people shot to death in Houston by police. About a 2-month period. Our police chief, and I'm not using this as a platform to bash our police chief really, but he was really into all the protests that were going on all around the country, except for Houston. He did not want to focus on Houston because he'd had all these shootings right here locally. And he would even get out with the marchers, the George Floyd protest marchers. But it was all focused on George Floyd. And so during this very same time, I think everybody that was shot, the 8 people were either African American or Latino.
I feel like there's a lot of people who think that this isn't a racially motivated issue. I mean, ultimately, it's a human rights issue. It affects everybody. But the fact that you see that Black people are, 2-3 times more likely to experience police brutality. You see, the mass incarceration rate. And I just feel like if it wasn't a race issue, we would see the white George Floyd video, or we will see different video. And I feel like if it wasn't a race issue, you would see these things. And if these things are happening, which I'm assuming that they are, how come more people, white people, are not sharing these videos? Like, the only reason why we even know about George Floyd is because somebody took out their cell phone and did this, and it was a Black woman who did it. So, I mean, they're seeing this, happening, and then they're recording it. Like, where are the comparable incidences where there's a white man getting shot in the back, ran away from the police or whatever? And so that's why it really needs to be addressed as something that is a racial issue.
So if someone who is a police officer does something and it's wrong, well, they need to be held to the same standard of a regular citizen and face those necessary charges. For far too long, what's happened is officers have been put on a pedestal and have been essentially above the law and are untouchable when it comes to a courtroom, because the juries always side with the officers regardless of the situation at hand. That right there, I think, is what really needs to change. We need to make sure that the juries reflect the communities where the incident took place, and also that it's fair and inclusive so that the right verdict can be reached. If there's a tape out there and it clearly shows that the police officer or officers used excessive force and murdered someone, that should be a closed case. Shut the door. It's over. Many times we've seen these videos play out and the officers are never convicted for what they've done. You take away the George Floyd tape in this instance, I can guarantee you there would be a number of people, mostly white, who would side with the police if you took the tape away. How do I know that? Because it's happened before. This is nothing new. So if something's really going to change, it needs to change with the police department.
Last question. Does Donald Trump Our favorite president. Contribute to the race relations and tensions, I guess, that we've been experiencing thus far. Does he have any, blame in, the tension that we're experiencing right now in regards to race relations? Jeremy?
He sure does. He sure does. One of the interesting things about our president is that he's an attention seeker. He loves to accept the praise when it's given to him, but he cannot stand criticism. But everyone knows that if it happens on your watch, you are responsible for it. These, racial tensions that are going on now, yes, they've happened before, but now is a lot different, and it's all happening under his watch. So yes, he has a part in that. There's a debate sometimes between people: is he racist or is he not? Oh well, he could very well be, but that's not even my issue. The issue is that his rhetoric appeals to those that are racist. So that's telling you everything you need to know right there. If his rhetoric appeals to a racist, well, what is he saying
Exactly.
that appeals to him?
You're racist. Like, I don't even understand any other way.
Yeah. He has his hat, make America great again. And I tell people all the time, I don't think everyone that wears that hat is a racist, but I do think someone that is racist would wear that hat. So, yes, he contributes to the racial tensions. No, he hasn't done a good job of improving them, and that's just the way he is. I think he doesn't really care about what anyone else thinks or feels. It's all about him and his show, and that's just the way he is.
I agree with you, Jeremy, 100%. I think he was endorsed for the second time. Trump was endorsed for the second time just the other day by the KKK. You don't have to. There you are.
I know. And then he acts like he doesn't even know what the KKK is. It's like, wow.
Is he going to denounce that endorsement? Oh, yeah. See, probably not.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for watching us today. Make sure you check out our other videos when we talk about race relations in this country. Make sure you like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let us know what you think about the topics we've been talking about today. Peace.